Okay, our next speaker is Greg Bishop. Greg is a magazine editor, and Adventures Unlimited published the anthology from his magazine, The Excluded Middle. His book is called Wake Up Down There. It's a great book full of interesting stuff, including a lot of Greg's UFO researchers. And without further ado, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Greg Bishop.
Hi, thank you. Okay, this talk is about what happened to Paul Bennewitz in the late 1970s, early 80s. How many of you know about that case, or have you even heard of it? Walter knows. Okay, I'll give a little bit of a background. And Dave was describing, well, the last talk I did with this, I had half an hour. So now I have a ton of time, so I can do a lot more background. The magazine that the book came from, Dave, did you take the book away? This one was called Excluded Middle. I don't think I'm publishing it anymore, that one. And we started that in the early 90s, and I ended up meeting people like David and Ken Thomas, other people who changed my mind about lots of things. When your eyes get opened, you suddenly realize that there's a lot of work to do. So one of the interviews we did was with Bill Moore. Anybody know who Bill Moore is? Some of you ought to know who he is, yeah. He's a UFO researcher. He's pretty much retired now. He's kind of a central part of this story. I met him in 1988 to do a video documentary. I just did like a talking head of him and Stanton Friedman and a couple other people. And I found out his office was coincidentally about 2 blocks away from mine, so I just walked down and talked to him because I'd heard of him. But in 1989, he gave a speech at the Las Vegas Mutual UFO Network convention where he admitted that he had been working with elements of U.S. intelligence, specifically the Air Force Office of Special Intelligence, to report on other UFO researchers and what they thought. Not really about what they were doing or their personal lives or anything, really, but what their ideas were about what they were seeing and what they were hearing, because the military wanted to know what people were seeing in the skies and what they thought they were, whether they were identified or not. I'll go into a little bit of strange things like anti-gravity and things like that later as they relate to the story. So I actually went to that talk in '89, and I sat outside and I helped Bill with his table selling books and things. And then I went in to watch the speech. And before he even got there were problems with the speech because people were so pissed off at Bill and what they thought he was doing, all the rumors flying around. They started their own mini convention and split off and presented their own stuff. Took up one entire morning of the convention with unsanctioned, MUFON unsanctioned speeches. People like Bill Lear, Bill Cooper, there's a lot of Bills, aren't there? Bill Lear, Bill Cooper, Bill English, and a couple other people had their own conference describing how there were aliens here. They had deals with the government in exchange for abduction rights. We would get technology, things like that. And Bill had been hearing this for probably at least 10 years. And the reason he'd heard it is because it was coming from Paul Bennewitz. And the reason Paul Bennewitz was saying these things is what I was going to get into. So yeah, I wanted to say a little bit more about the talk. I really wasn't prepared for how people were going to take it. I knew people were anticipating what he was going to say, but I wasn't prepared. I went in there and he started talking, and almost from probably the first couple minutes, people started yelling. People were yelling. I was surprised they weren't throwing things. It was the most unwell received speech I've ever seen, ever. It was great. People were yelling. Somebody ran out in tears. They had to calm everybody down. A woman ran by me crying and ran out the door. A lot of people walked out. They had to stop the speech about 4 or 5 times to restore order. It was great. I couldn't believe, I was like, I have to know about this. Why are people so mad about this? And so basically that started me being interested in the story about Benowitz and Bill Moore and the rest of the things I'm going to tell you about. I'll give you a little bit more background about what happened to me, because actually people that have seen the book, 2 or 3 people that have read this book that's coming out in February, have said it made them paranoid and they had to put it down after a while. And I didn't even notice when I was writing it that it would make... maybe I was too used to it, because in the mid-90s, some guy who said he was from naval intelligence approached me and started telling me all kinds of weird things, a secret history of the world, what the military was doing, what kind of rights the government had. Then started, he gave me about 400 or 500 pages worth of his writings, which hasn't been published, but really affected me. He just handed it out to a few people, and I don't know if this was some kind of psychological operation on a few researchers or what. He said he was from naval intelligence. He seemed to know things that nobody should know. He'd say, go over to the Burbank airport at 4 o'clock at 4 o'clock this afternoon and tell me what you see. And the stealth fighter would come over, and it was right after they announced it. And nobody knew the thing was supposed to be flying out of the Burbank airport. He'd say, you know, look, in Serbia in 2 weeks, X will happen. The United States will move into this area. Bang, it would happen in the news. So this is how I'm going to try and start explaining how disinformation works. This stuff was true. I mean, the guy had some, you know, I don't know whether he was in the military or not. He never showed me any credentials or anything, but he knew things he shouldn't have known. And then, on top of that, he would say, it's very easy for people to break into your house, look at your files, look at your computer when you're in the house by somehow seeing what's on your screen by being outside of your house or in another room, just things like this. And for about a year, I didn't know where to turn. I was totally paranoid. It was not fun to be around me for that year. It was not fun to be me for that year. But yeah, that stuff gets old after a while, unless you're really addicted to it or something, which I am not. So eventually I came through that. But Paul Benowitz came through it too, but he had a much rougher ride. So anyway, enough of introduction, unless there's something that's confusing to people. Actually, you know, when I'm talking, if there's something that you want to ask or something that's unclear, go right ahead and shoot your hand up, because I don't mind being interrupted. Anyway.
But if they could raise their hand, so it gives me time to get it on the
Yes, yes, please.
Greg,
Uh-huh.
will that information you were talking about, those 500 pages, will any of that ever be written about, or will that ever get out?
I don't know. I only know 2 other people that have that stuff that he handed out. You know what? It's things that I've basically seen later. It was pages from release documents from MK Ultra, MK Artichoke, all the mind control stuff, articles from magazines about how, you know, the Bush administration, the first one, had legalized lying about things if it involved national security, or, you know, strengthened that part of their the CIA charter, things like that. I mean, mostly it was open source. In fact, almost all of it was open source, if you know what that means. It's just things anybody can find anywhere if they know where to look: magazines, books, TV. But it was presented in such a way that it made me think differently, and probably was good training for learning this and talking to, you know, I'd been talking to Bill, sort of understood what he was talking about, Bill Moore, but this kind of really brought it home. And it was just one of those things you just needed to go through to be able to understand and not handle whatever, be able to assimilate what came later. And I hope that wasn't coming through this paranoid lens. It was coming through a clarity of vision lens, you know. So that's how I want to present this. So actually, let's see, this is, which one? Oh, right, that's right, here we go. That's Paul Benowitz. It's the only picture we could find of him. Some people said they had pictures, but that's him standing in front of his plane. He had a little Cessna plane. He was a private pilot. Actually, that was on the cover of Krista Tilton's book, I think it was called The Benowitz Papers. The only other book ever written specifically about Benowitz, but it was self-published and it didn't get much circulation. You can still find it. I think Arcturus Books probably has it. So this picture, I think, was taken around the time that the events I'm going to speak of began. This is in probably in 78, 79. Paul Benowitz was an electrical physicist. He had a master's degree in electrical physics, and he owned a company. His family still owns it. It's called Thunder Scientific. They build temperature and humidity instruments for the Navy and NASA and some foreign contracts and even the Air Force. And the company is located right outside Kirtland Air Force Base, which is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Kirtland is this huge Air Force base. It covers probably as much area as the city of Albuquerque does, just about. It goes quite far south of Albuquerque. And his company was located right at the, well, I can't remember what direction it is, I guess a north gate, but the Wyoming entrance gate. You'll see a picture of it later. So basically the Air Force was his neighbor. And when he went home, the Air Force was his neighbor too. He lived right on the border of the Air Force base, you know, around about 10 miles away at another location. He had two sons. His two sons still run the business, Thunder Scientific, and his wife, who is still alive. And apparently he was an aerobatic pilot. It said that in his obituary. I don't know if you can do aerobatics in that kind of a plane. I have no idea. But with all these things, he also had a very heavy interest in the UFO subject. It was something that had interested him for quite a long time. He was a member of APRO, which was Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. It was one of the biggest UFO organizations, private, in the world, till they disbanded in the mid-90s, I think, when the two founders died. I still have to figure out how this goes. That way. All right. That's his home. It's in the Four Hills section of Albuquerque. It's a really nice area. It's next to a country club. That's like a two-story home. Up over here, I think, or no, over here is a deck. It's on the second story, coming outside this bedroom, and you can look that way, or actually this way, out towards you, which is where Kirtland Air Force Base is. There's a really good view of Kirtland Air Force Base from this neighborhood, and especially up on this hill where he lives. That one. Anyway, yeah, that's the sign for Thunder Scientific. That's the company I was talking about, temperature, humidity calibration measurement instruments. There's the Kirtland Air Force Base sign right there. It actually says Wyoming Gate right there. Thunder Scientific is about 4 buildings this way. Like I said, it's still going, and his sons run it. And there's a warning that says you have to be submitted to a search and all that. I went to this base. I tried to get in because Bill told me, why don't you just tell him you're going to the Atomic Museum? Because the Atomic Museum showed missiles and models of the first 2 atom bombs. Used to be on the base, but after September 11th, 2001, they moved it off. And you can't go inside that base anymore. However, I did get to go in the base, and I'll tell you about that later. Okay, that's a good lead into Kirtland Air Force Base. That's a map of Kirtland, well, a satellite picture of Kirtland Air Force Base from, I think it's from MapQuest. I don't even know if it's up there anymore. What was happening was in late 1979, and that home I showed you, his house is right about there. There's the country club. That's Albuquerque International Airport. And I think the Air Force uses these runways over here, but that's the terminal. What was going on? What caught Benowitz's attention is right about in this area. He was seeing these lights flying around, doing these weird things that airplanes don't do, just about almost nightly. In late 1979, this started around October, something like that. He brought his wife out there. They're saying, "Wonder what that is," and he eventually bought some cameras and picked, still cameras, movie cameras, and I think maybe in video, and started videotaping, filming, and taking pictures of these objects. And he He didn't know what they were. He was interested in UFOs, but at that point he figured he was a scientist and he was trying to figure out what was going on. Anything else I should tell? Oh, right here is the, this is called Manzano Complex, Manzano Mountain. In 1947, strangely enough, this entire mountain was dug into and tunneled out and used to store nuclear weapons components, and some people have been set whole bombers and stuff, they'd move in there. Underground. Actually, people flying into the airport over here could see them digging it. They said it looked like a big anthill. And so at various points around this mountain, I think this is about maybe 2 miles from here to here. Not too long, 2 or 3 miles from end to end. And this is, Albuquerque's up here. This is all Albuquerque here. And there's a Highway 40, I think, goes this way and goes off to the east. So it's actually pretty close. But he was right on the perimeter fence here. What's in these, what's around this side of the mountain where you can't see it from anywhere over here, but you can see from around here, the bunker, there's little bunkers that stick out, little concrete bunkers, and they're all entrances to these tunnels where all these things were stored. I don't think they store anything there anymore. It's been decommissioned to the point where there's almost nothing there. I don't know what they use it for now. That area was very, I think it had the highest concentration of nuclear weapons anywhere in the world at the time in the late 70s. So anybody looking in this area and pointing cameras over here is going to get some sort of, at least if the Air Force knows about it, they're going to get some attention. So yeah, that's Kirtland. I have some other pictures of. I mean, I have a map of Kirtland. It was given by Bill Moore, which we will look at in a second here. That's the view from Paul Benowitz's home, or essentially it is. His home's a little higher up. There's the airport runway I was talking about, the Albuquerque Airport, and Manzano Mountains over here. And that's the view if you kind of turn this way and look more to the left. That's the mountain we just saw from the satellite picture. There's a facility over here called the Starfire Range, which I will talk about later too. Actually, when I was there last summer, there was a thunderstorm going, but it was only going over this peak. It was really weird. There were like a cloud here, a cloud here, a cloud here, and then thunder and lightning banging around on this peak. It was very weird. There's a sign, that's one of the signs, you can't read it to where it says Air Force installation. Walter might be able to tell you exactly what that might say. Permission to pass must be granted by a base commander.
Is that a deadly force authorized sign?
It might be.
If there were nukes?
Yes, there were nukes in there, and there's still things going on in there that they don't want people looking at. So in 1979, Benowitz was looking in this area right here. There's about a mile or so, mile and a half between his home and the base of this mountain here. And around in this area, these weird lights were doing these things, going up and down, stopping, going left and right, zooming way off in the distance and coming back. And he started to take pictures of them, take movies. His house is up in here. I mean, this is just the street. It's a private subdivision where he lives. I drove up in there, even though it said you're not supposed to go in there, just so I could see where his house was. This is Wagon Train Drive. It's in that nice area of town. This is interesting. I took a picture. This is the very northern end of that mountain that keeps going this way, Manzano Mountain. Right there is a fence, and right there is a fence. And either one or both of them are electrified. There's some kind of shiny things on the top of the fence here. I don't know what those are. They were reflecting sunlight. You can see them. And obviously, those are electrified for a reason. And they actually have found people dead, electrocuted, like in between these fences and on them. They couldn't figure out how somebody got up the first electrified fence and then died in the middle. But they've found people that have tried to get in. So that it was a really secure place. They didn't want people going around because they were all nuclear weapons. Yes?
Greg, is it like some UFO investigators are trying to get on the base, or I mean, why are they trying to get on the base?
I don't know. I was just told by people that used to work on the base that they found, security people and a physicist that I talked to, Jerry Miller actually, that they found maybe over 10 years, found 3 or 4 people that had tried to get in there. I don't know, I guess they just jumped over the barbed wire fence and ran in there. I don't know why they were trying to get in there, and they don't know why, or they wouldn't tell me. That wasn't part of my interest, so I didn't ask. I really didn't care. That's the Starfire range. It's an astronomical facility, but it's not really, and I'll tell you about that later. Let me go back a couple, so I'll show you something. Right there is a facility of Sandia Labs, which is run by the DOE now, I think, Department of Energy. Their administrative buildings are over in here. That's the Kirtland Air Base Golf Course right there. Anyway, that's the Sandia Labs, and they have a facility back here behind this mountain where nobody can see it, because this mountain sticks up and blocks all view from anywhere around. And by the time you get over here, you're so far away you can't see it. Plus, it's in a little valley. So at one point, Bill was on the base driving around with Richard Doty, who was an Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which is AFOSI officer. And he said, take a picture of that. And this is what when the picture came back, this is what he got. There's an entrance to a garage right there and maybe a tower right here, but it looks like a big snowdrift. And he said, and Bill said, how'd you do that? And Doty just kind of giggled. That's a picture taken with a black and white camera of a bunch of buildings. That little white area you saw, there's a bunch of buildings and a facility in here, but if you try to take a picture of it, it comes out like that. Nobody's explained how that works. It must be painted with some weird paint or something. It won't you can see it, but you can't photograph it. So after these lights and things were flying around on the base there, and Benowitz was taking pictures of them, wondering what was going on, he also started trying to pick up radio signals. He was an electrical physicist. He knew how to do these things. He got a call from somebody saying that there was something he should look into. The call was, I went ahead, but the call was from a New Mexico State police officer who had gotten assigned to a case, or at least to try to help this woman that said she had seen a UFO, a big football field-sized thing hovering over a pasture in northern New Mexico when they were coming home from, her and her son were coming home from a trip. This was also in 1979. So, Benowitz, being a member of APRO, Area Phenomenal Research Organization, called up and he said, who do you think could help me with this? And James Lorenzen, who was the director of APRO at the time, said, Leo Sprinkle can help you. This is a picture of Leo Sprinkle. He had been regressing abductees since about 1975. Maybe even before that. I'm not sure how far back his career goes, but at that point, the stories were a lot less standard than they are now. A lot of weird things happen to people that don't come out in stories now, probably because people expect to hear certain things and they block out other things, maybe even subconsciously during the interview process. Hypnosis is really, I don't think it's a good tool for abduction research, but that's something else. Anyway, but perhaps at this time it may have been a little better because there weren't really any preconceived notions about what should be going on. So Leo Sprinkle flew down there. Benowitz paid for him to fly down to Albuquerque. And a New Mexico State police officer drove this woman, Myrna Hansen, I did say Hansen, yeah, Myrna Hansen, from her home in Eagle's Nest, which is as far northeastern corner of New Mexico, right near Oklahoma. They actually had gone to the panhandle of Oklahoma and they were coming back. They were supposed to be home at 9 at night. They didn't get home until 1 in the morning. They wondered why this was, because they had seen these lights. I mean, this is a typical thing everybody's heard about now, missing time. So Benowitz got in touch with Sprinkle, flew him down from Laramie, Wyoming, took a cab to the house, and introduced Myrna Hansen and said, you know, she wants to find out what's going on. So Leo Sprinkle put her in a trance and started asking her questions. And this story came out that her and her son, they didn't hypnotize because either she didn't want to or he didn't think it was, Sprinkle didn't think it was useful, or the kid recalled enough they didn't need to. But he hypnotized Myrna Hansen, and she said, we saw these two things, one as big as a, how much time do I have left? Oh, wonderful. 45 minutes? Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. I'm gaining time, I think. But they had seen these two big things and then seen this herd of cattle underneath it, strangely enough. This hooks into something else I'm going to talk about. The cattle were yelling, screaming, bellowing. They were all, crowding together because they were scared. And under hypnosis, she said she'd seen one of these cows sucked up into this one of the UFOs. And then a few minutes later, her and her son were suddenly inside it, and she saw what was happening to this cow. It was being taken apart. It was dead. It was being mutilated, as it's called now, on board this UFO. That's what she said she remembered. She said she also remembered being in some underground facility somewhere. She could hear running water. She couldn't find her son for a while, and then he appeared again. The aliens, or whatever they were, told her, no, he's fine, and then they were back together again in their car. She said she remembered the car being lowered onto the road and just kind of went boom, and this blue light, it just dropped back down on the ground, and they were able to continue and go home. When she was under hypnosis, she described something like this, and I think Krista Tilton drew this. She said she saw vats, these big vats on the ship, or in the underground facility with body parts floating in them. She didn't know where this facility was, but Benowitz thought he might know. This is a letter. I've got a lot of letters from Benowitz. These have never been published. And actually, the telephone numbers and all that are different now, so if you try to call, you're not going to get anything. Or you'll get somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about. These are letters he started to send out to APRO and a few other researchers, people saying, what he had found out, how to interview witnesses, UFO abduction witnesses. Notice the date, 1980. I think Missing Time hadn't come out yet, or had just come out, the first really big abduction book, the one by Bud Hopkins. So he was in virgin territory. He was him and Sprinkle. Actually, he kept hypnotizing. He thought the session went so well. He asked Leo Sprinkle to come back. He came back about a month later in June of 1980, and I interviewed Leo Sprinkle about this. He said when he came to the door, everybody's reading the letter now. Oh, God. I'm going to put it back there. When he came to the door, okay, go ahead and read. When he came to the door, Paul Benowitz answered the door, and he had a rifle in one hand and a pistol on his hip and said, "Get in here quick, the aliens are coming." And Sprinkle was like, "What's going on here? This is insane. I can't work like this." But he hypnotized her again. There was, the session wasn't too good because everybody was very nervous, and they wanted to do the hypnosis in an automobile in a garage with barbecue type tin foil on the windows, because he thought the aliens were beaming some sort of mind control rays in and screwing up the hypnosis and controlling Myrna Hansen. This is the only way they could get rid of it. And whether that's true or not, I'm sure it made Myrna Hansen feel just terrible. She didn't know what was going on. And Paul, yes?
That always had some familiarity with Betty and Barney Hill, though.
Yes, he did.
Right, so
Yeah. Well, every case up to then, including Travis Walton case. Actually, after this incident with Leo Sprinkle coming to the door and the gun and the aliens are coming over the wall at any minute, Sprinkle decided that was it. He didn't want to have to be involved with the case anymore because it was getting out of hand, and he didn't want to make, harm anybody or ruin his reputation or be involved with it at all. So Benowitz actually found this man, James Harder, who was still alive and didn't want to talk to me, and said he didn't remember anything about the case, which is weird because he worked with Benowitz for months, perfecting, if you want to call that the word, these methods. And, they finally ended up putting poor Myrna Hansen in a hotel room with a what does it say? Maybe it's on the last one. Yeah, the X-ray machine. Yeah, that's one of them. But he figures that if it's shielded by some kind of metal, the aliens can't control the hypnosis session. I haven't heard this from any other abduction researcher ever. So either this is a one-time deal or he was completely, off in left field. He also said that they should ground the abductee to a is it on here somewhere? Not really, but they should take a banana plug and tape the one end to the person's wrist and plug the other end into into an electrical socket in the in the ground wire. So they had her hooked up to this thing, sitting. They actually held an umbrella over her with foil under it, things like that. I mean, and they did hypnosis sessions in moving cars because they thought the aliens could. Very weird things, and. Whatever happened to Myrna Hansen, I'm sure that whatever Benowitz did to her, did with her and to her, probably extrapolated her even further away from whatever the experience was. But at the same time, this started his interest in this underground base, which I will talk about later. This is the Dulce UFO base part that is part of the talk. The Air Force, meanwhile, had problems of their own. Coyote Canyon was that area I showed you with the lab that you couldn't see in the picture. It's behind the mountain there where you can't see it. What happened was on August 8th, 1980, this is still all happening in 1980, there was a UFO sighting on the base. Not the UFOs over here that Benowitz were filming, but something out behind the mountain here. A couple of guards were patrolling the perimeter. There's a perimeter road that goes around here, around this whole facility. That's that nuclear storage area. And they saw this light come flying in from the northeast of them, and kind of float over here. This is kind of a compilation of two different cases that happened. And they watched it for a while. It kind of darted around and did these weird things, and it shot straight up in the air and disappeared. They didn't know what to make of that. They reported in. Nothing else happened. They made a report later. 2 nights later, another guard working for Sandia Labs. Actually, no, I'm sorry. These were Air Force guards that were patrolling around here because Sandia was this facility, Coyote Canyon, back over here. And maybe it's there. No, that's his AEC control area, I think. Atomic Energy Commission. Anyway, the Sandia guards were patrolling down this road. I think they were coming down this way, and they saw something else come in from about the same place, and it landed over here in a little canyon, and it landed next to a nuclear storage bunker, which had an alarm on it. So one of the guards went flying over there to see what was going on. Well, driving over there in his Jeep. He got there, and he saw this bright light, disc-shaped thing sitting on the ground. He pulled out his shotgun and started to ask who was there, and it too took off straight up into the air and disappeared in a second or two. Just no sound, nothing. So they made a report of this, and this is separate from Benowitz. Benowitz never said he saw this or heard anything about it. He was looking over here, in this area. Maybe he was asleep then. I don't know. So these were both near midnight or after, very, very late. So about a month later, Richard Doty, who signed the form here, interviewed the people that had seen these. This is about both of those incidents. 3 of the guards, just like what I told you, they saw a light travel at great speed, stop suddenly over Coyote Canyon. They first thought it was a helicopter. After observing the strange aerial maneuvers, they felt a helicopter couldn't perform such skills. The light landed in the Coyote Canyon area. Oh, so it did land. Sometime later, they witnessed the light take off and leave, proceeding straight up at a high speed. Then on the 11th, well, that was when it was reported, August 8th. So 3 days later, another guard saw something else land. He first thought it was a helicopter. After driving closer, he observed a round disc-shaped object. He attempted to radio for a backup patrol, but his radio would not work, typical. As he approached the object on foot, armed with a shotgun, the object took off in a vertical direction at a high rate of speed. He's a former helicopter mechanic and stated the object was not a helicopter. The funny thing is that after this physicist I talked to, Jerry Miller, who didn't want me to use his name in the book, but this isn't the book, we're standing here and talking, told me that the NSA, not the NSA, the NSA and a special branch of the Air Force called the PJ branch, I don't know what that stands for, do you, Walter?
Special Projects Division. It's also known as Region 7. They're the section who provides program protection for all Air Force technologies.
Right. Walter was in the AFOSI. He helped me with the book. Very helpful. They came out to interview these same people and trying to find out what was going on. They stayed there for about a month. Maybe they went and sat out in the canyon waiting for something else to come along and find out what it was. Then Doty and Jerry Miller told me they took off and never told anybody what their findings were. They filed their report somewhere, took off, and nobody at the base was ever, at least that I talked to, was ever able to find out what those reports said or what they had gotten out of these witnesses. Who knows? But that's how the PJ branch and NSA works, at least in this case. Then a few, what was this, 13 August. Right in the middle of all this, all the radar in the Albuquerque area went out for about 6 hours. Shut down. The Air Force radar, the civilian radar, everything. Something was jamming the radar and they couldn't figure out what it was. This was, I was told that a friend of mine went and looked at the logs at Albuquerque Airport and it was actually entered in there. Radar not working, working on it, couldn't figure it out. Then suddenly at 10:15 in the evening, bam, all the radar came back on and they couldn't figure out why. The funny thing is that the Defense Nuclear Agency determined that the jamming was coming from an area of northwest of Coyote Canyon test area, which means they might have been testing something that knocked out all the radar. It sounds like, you know, if you can knock out somebody's radar, you can do all kinds of stuff. But then nobody ever admitted to it, and all the radar came back on, and, you know, 6 hours later at 10:15 at night. So there were a lot of weird things going on around Kirtland at the time. Things were being tested we probably don't know about. Who knows? Maybe UFOs from somewhere else turned off the radar. I don't know, but they seem to think it was coming from, this is an internal complaint form, report form. So here's some of the pictures that, you know what, I'm not even gonna look at these stupid notes. Benowitz, here's a picture again from where he was taking, seeing these lights. And they were flying around in this area. I think this is, okay. Yeah, I've already told you this, so this is a redundant map here. The Starfire optical range is here, which is a facility I will talk about in a second. Myrna Hansen was actually taken to this medical research facility on the base down here, where I was told they were doing tests for people with terminal diseases like cancer. And testing, people would have to consent to doing these tests, and if they got well, fine. If they didn't, well, the experiment didn't work.
Excuse me, whose facility was that?
Lovelace Medical. They have a big hospital over in Albuquerque.
And they had a facility right there?
They had a facility on the base where they, I was told that they did animal testing, you know, exposing animals to radiation and all that, but also had a human medicine, probably nuclear medicine facility down here. Myrna, huh?
So Greg, the Air Force then was testing her after her abduction experience.
Yeah, I'm getting to that.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm getting to that. Benowitz actually asked the Air Force, he got in touch with them later. I will get into that. Asked,
What were they testing?
what do you mean?
What were they testing for at this medical facility?
They were trying to, ostensibly the idea of the medical facility was to get people to test methods of treating terminal patients, mostly cancer, with nuclear radiation or anything else they had. And these were experimental, you know, unapproved methods. The Air Force wasn't doing that. Lovelace rented this from them. However, the Air Force said since they had jurisdiction over it, they could use their machinery, all that. Benowitz asked if they could take in Myrna Hansen, and because they both seemed to believe she had some kind of thing implanted in her neck that the aliens were controlling her with. So she went down there and they had this really powerful X-ray that could pick up things as thin as a human hair, and they did find something.
And the letter said she had a virus.
Huh?
And the letter said that they thought she had a virus from the aliens.
Yeah. That was just one of the ideas he came up with. Apparently he dropped that idea and went with the alien implant. She did get sick quite a bit. She kept getting sick and they couldn't figure out why. Maybe that was another reason why she went down to this facility. But they X-rayed her, found something, but the Air Force said, well, it's just something that shows up on X-rays. People have weird things in their bodies and weird shadows come up on X-rays. And they gave these X-rays to Benowitz and let him have them. And there was something in there. I haven't seen the X-rays, though. I've just been told by two people that have seen them what they saw. That's one of the pictures that Benowitz took of these things flying around. Now, I think it's a blown-up picture. but you can see these like blue things underneath. I don't know if that's from the lens of the camera. Most people just come right out and say, well, look at that, that's amazing. And it's like, well, you know, when you zoom in a camera and it's out of focus, you're going to get lens aberrations. They're going to be magnified. Anyway, he said there's a blue glow underneath it, and that's what these pictures show. This picture does anyway. I think it's a still from 8mm film. It's very grainy, or it's very blown up, which seems to be a feature that people have seen on lots of UFO cases, and strangely enough, in reports of anti-gravity craft. It seems to be an area of this ionization of air that glows, and it'll often glow blue. Nobody I was able to talk to could figure out what these pictures were of. They weren't ready to comment. They just said they didn't know. Richard Doty didn't know. Bill Moore didn't know.
What is that below?
It's probably the glow of the city or some light down beneath it.
Strange too.
Yeah, but it's blown up and it's grainy, so you don't see. These are points of light probably 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 miles away from where Benowitz is. Who knows where it is? He said they were in between him and the mountain, which was, you know, around maybe a mile or 2. So whatever they were either very close and very small, or far away and maybe a little bit larger. But I'll get into that later. There's a weird picture he took during the day of a PSA plane landing, and whatever this is. I mean, you could say it looks like a disc thing turned on its side, or it looks, you know, there's like a little bit of a glint off something here. Who knows what that is? It's not clear enough to make a determination, and I'm not going to, because I've heard so many people do that. Look, it's a flying saucer, and it's like, well, it could be. I mean, it's very convincing. If that's what you want to see, that's exactly what it looks like. Anyway, Myrna Hansen said that she had been taken to some underground facility somewhere. Benowitz, for some reason, believed this was in northern New Mexico. I don't know how he got that information. But when he got the call from Myrna Hansen, and they, you know, from APRO, and started doing the hypnosis sessions, they seemed to think that this facility was located in northeastern or northwestern New Mexico, near Dulce, which is a small town right near the border of Colorado. It's in the middle of a lot of completely undeveloped, no roads, anything, wilderness, very, very, very remote area. The person who had gotten Benowitz in touch with Hansen was this man, Gabe Valdez. He was a member of the New Mexico State Highway Patrol. He was in Dulce, but for some reason the guy in Eagle's Nest, or way over in the other corner of the state, knew about him. They knew him as the weirdo cattle mutilation UFO guy. So they called him, and he said, well, I met Paul Benowitz about a year ago. He knows about this stuff. Why don't you send him down there? And he arranged to have her driven, actually, from her home, about a 300-mile, I think 300-mile drive to Albuquerque. Gabe was investigating cattle mutilations in that area of the state since about the mid-70s. Everybody probably knows about this. Cattle were turning up dead on these ranchers' fields, and they couldn't figure out why, because it didn't look like what normally happened to cattle when they just died or got sick or whatever. They were killed. And weird things were done to them, like their sexual organs were taken out, their tongues were cut out, their eyes were taken out. Things that predators would do, but not with the precision that was observed. The FBI was a former FBI man was called out to do a study, Kenneth Rommel, in the late 70s, and he said it was all predators. And the ranchers didn't know what they were talking about. The ranchers got very mad at this because the guy was from New York and he'd never seen a cow till he got out to New Mexico and started looking at these cases. They said, we know what we're talking about, you don't. And another thing which is very weird is the cattle, sometimes the flies and things that were on them, the flies died because there was something in the carcass that was even killing the predators. So, and a lot of animals would stay away from them. They would actually, usually cows, if something dies, it just gets eaten. Buzzards and coyotes and everything come out and eat it. But they wouldn't eat some of these things, which is kind of weird. Why leave these things alone? It's free food. Anyway, Gabe Valdez became kind of the point man for this. Other weird things were happening around Dulce. Lights were flying over the ridges. A lot of UFO sightings up there. After Paul talked to Gabe, he became even more convinced that this was a hot spot. Something was going on up there. That's one of the mutilated cows, and I was going to leave that up for a very short time. Another weird thing was that these cows had these marks on their legs. Now, predators don't grab you by the leg and carry you around. Apparently, they'd been picked up by the leg by a clamp or a rope or something, and their bones were all broken, like they'd been just dropped from somewhere, you know, all their bones broke. You know, if you just die, your bones don't, you know, if the cattle dies, the bones don't break. They were dropped from somewhere, many of them anyway. This is just a picture that I think Bill Moore took of one of these, the hind legs of these cattle, showing where where there was some mark there, that something was holding them up, and the leg was twisted in a funny angle, like it had been picked up by the leg. This is a weird thing too. Gabe found this in a field. It's a gas mask. Who knows who left it there or why? But it wasn't, you know, it could have been there for years. But that's not the only thing he found. He found this all over a field where there was a mutilated cow. This, as far as they've been able to determine, Bill doesn't agree with me, but that was radar chaff, which is it's really thin strips of metal that are shot out of the back of a plane to fool radar, like from a missile. So you don't get, so the missile homes in on the chaff and goes this way, and your plane keeps going this way. It shoots this stuff out, so there's another target for the missile to home in on. What that was doing on a field with a dead cow, nobody knows. And some of this was stuffed in the cow's mouth for some reason, like somebody wanted to play a weird joke. And these packets of paper were all over the field too. Some of them had some, like the machine that was supposed to eject this stuff out of this paper wasn't working properly. So all these little packets, some of them had this chaff in it, this shiny stuff all over the field, and some stuffed in the cow's mouth. Very weird stuff. I talked to Linda Howe last year after I gave a talk, and she said, it's all being done by aliens. And I said, well, how do you know that? She goes, well, you know, I've done this for so long, and I know. I said, well, what about things like this? And she said, the aliens do that to make you think that humans are involved. And I said, I don't know what else to say. There's nothing else I can say. I mean, I'm convinced there's a human involvement, and I'll talk a little bit about it later. The AFOSI gets involved. That's Richard Doty. He was assigned to go out and talk to Benowitz. When Benowitz called up the base and said, I have something to tell you. There's something really weird going on at your base, and you have to, you know, if you don't know what's going on, I've got some information for you. So he was handed, hey Jerry, he was handed off to Richard Doty, who would become the point man in this whole saga. That's Richard Doty. That's a picture from about 2 years ago. If you never knew what he looked like, that's what he looks like. He still kind of looks like that. I got to talk to him for about 5 hours. It took about 9 months to get to the point where he had actually said, okay, I'll talk to you. But it finally worked out. Anyway, Doty was the man that was assigned to take care of Benowitz. He and Jerry Miller, who I've talked about, went out to Paul Benowitz's house on October 26 of 1980. Jerry Miller was it says here he's Chief Scientific Advisor for Air Force Test and Eval Center, Kirtland Air Force Base. What's GS-15, Walter? What level is that?
That's pretty high.
It's very high.
You're on the, it's like a management level thing. It's
Yeah.
the equivalent in the military of being like a colonel or a general officer.
Exactly. So this is the level Jerry was at. He apparently had an interest in the UFO subject too. He said, I'd like to go out with Rick out to this guy Benowitz's house and see what he's working on. Maybe there's something to it. They went out to the house. This doesn't say everything that happened at the house. It said that, Mr. Miller is one of the best known, knowledgeable, and impartial investigators of aerial objects in the Southwest. He had worked with J. Allen Hynek. He was on the Defense Intelligence Agency staff list from 1981 as Director of Space and Satellite Systems, I believe. Anyway, he went out there to Benowitz's house to look at these films and pictures and apparently video, but that's not mentioned on here. Dr. Benowitz has been conducting independent research for aerial phenomena for the last 15 months. He produced several electronic recording tapes. These are signals he was picking up from the base. That interested them very much. What the hell is he listening to? High periods of electrical magnetism emitted from Manzano Coyote Canyon area. He had several pictures. You can read the rest of this. Clearly shows some kind of unidentified aerial objects were caught on film, but no conclusions could be made whether these objects pose a threat. He felt the electrical recording tapes were inconclusive and could have been gathered from several conventional sources because I don't think he knew what it was yet. No sightings other than these have been reported in the area. Mr. Miller has contacted Foreign Technology Division personnel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base who expressed an interest. Well, of course they did. They gathered all the UFO information for quite a long time. What's a DCI check?
That's the, I believe that's
Background?
Defense Criminal Investigative
Okay.
Information.
This was responsible to HQCR 44, headquarters collection requirement 44, which has anything to do with nuclear. At least at the time, that was the designation for it. So some guy was looking at one of their nuclear facilities, making a lot of noise, and they were worried about it, so they wanted to do a background check on him. What I was told, actually, that's not in this report, was that Richard Doty was running around behind Benowitz and Miller, who were talking most of the time, and taking pictures with a little camera of his house, of his pictures, of his recording setup, everything, just running around with a little spy camera and taking pictures for the NSA, because they were concerned with what he was listening to. So that's a little piece that hadn't been figured out before that I found out by talking to Doty and Miller, actually. Both people that were at the house at the time I actually got access to talk to. Jerry Miller is a very nice man. He actually was the one that took me on the base and drove me around for about an hour. So very soon after that, in November, the next month, 10th of November, not even a couple weeks later, they asked Benowitz to come in and talk to them about what he was seeing, bring all this stuff, and there were going to be a bunch of people from the base sitting in this meeting room listening to his information. I was told that Benowitz came in, the general was, the commander of the base, General William Brookshire was there, a Jack Shepard, Thomas something, I don't know. A bunch of these people are actually security people, AFOSI, and then a couple of scientists, Dr. Lehman, Director, Air Force Weapons Lab, Ed Breen, Air Force Weapons Lab, Information Specialist, and Benowitz. I was told that a lot of people were sitting in this meeting. By the time Benowitz got to the end of it, there were only about 2 people left because they started, this has nothing to do with me, I don't care about this guy's a nut, and they walked out. However, at the end of the meeting, he wanted to find out if he could get financial assistance from the Air Force in furthering his investigation. Dr. Lehman advised, it says Dr. Bennett, which was kind of weird because he wasn't a doctor in anything and he never claimed he was, to request a Air Force grant for research. He advised he would assist him filling out the proper documents. Apparently he did get a grant, and apparently it was from the NSA. He got a large amount of money to do research from them, but I think what they were buying was his confidence and silence. They told him not to talk about things, and he didn't because he was essentially working for them. That I never knew before either until we did this story. He was writing to his congressmen and senators, specifically Domenici and Harrison Schmitt, the former astronaut. He was one of the senators from New Mexico at that time. The Air Force was wondering, why the hell is he calling the senator up? This isn't good. I mean, we're testing things that I found out that probably even the senators and congressmen weren't supposed to know about. They were black budget type things. Does everybody know what disinformation is? I'll give a short.
CNN, like that?
Yes. It's a whole bunch of things that are probably true mixed. I mean, of 2 or 3 things, maybe 10% of things that are probably true mixed in with about 90% of bullshit. Yeah, they had good teachers. Actually, at one point, Benowitz they got so worried about these signals he was picking up that somebody came out and gave him a computer that said, this will figure out the signals even better. I've been told that was Alan Hynek, J. Allen Hynek. Nobody wants to believe that. The only person that told me was Bill Moore. The J. Allen Hynek Center would not confirm it for me. They said they couldn't find any notes that Hynek had on Benowitz. I didn't tell them why I was asking for the notes because they would have told me to go to get lost. But apparently somebody at some point that Benowitz trusted came and gave him a whole new computer and said, use this to decode these messages.
Hynek was alive?
Yeah, 1980, 81? Early, huh?
1986.
Okay, yeah, thank you. He was very much alive. How much time do I have now? Half an hour?
10 minutes.
Really? Okay. Okay. When he plugged in what he was getting out of these signals into his computer, through that computer, this is what came out. We women do not marry, realize we are not unity, we are separate victory. What was being sent out was coded messages the NSA was using to send messages between spies or control weaponry, something like that. But there were actual messages contained in these things. They had spent years and all these man hours developing this stuff, and Benowitz comes along, this electrical physicist with a master's degree, and just starts figuring out pretty much what's being said. He was getting close, so that's why they came in and kind of said, here's something that'll help you more, and it started spitting out this junk, which basically reinforced his ideas about what was going on. Up here, on the Archuleta Mesa near Dulce, he put out a report called Project Beta. He described what he was seeing and how he might be able to fight these aliens and what they were doing, partly based on this computer program that he was given by the Air Force, or by the NSA actually. He wrote to Pete Domenici, his other senator, saying, I know the location of the alien bases. All these people are starting to wonder, what the hell is this guy doing? Why is he writing to us? And they go to the Air Force, and the Air Force says, the guy's crazy, don't listen to him. And so eventually the congressmen and senators stopped talking to him. They were told the Air Force had it under control, and they decided to believe him. He even wrote to Ronald Reagan and sent him a copy of that Project Beta report, and got a standard, the United States government is not interested in UFOs anymore reply. That's Bill Moore. I don't know where he got that T-shirt. He was doing research for his new book on the history of the Mormon Church, which should be out about the same time mine is, in February. He was assigned to watch Benowitz, talk to him, get in his confidence, and report on what he was thinking. But the way they reeled Bill Moore in was with this letter. This is known as the Weitzel letter. It was sent in, what does that say? Received by APRO July, I think it's 80. This was a guy that said he was on a training exercise and they had observed this UFO, and he was trying to tell somebody in the UFO community about it. Later I find out that this letter was sent on orders either by this guy Weitzel or by Richard Doty to try and reel somebody in from a UFO organization to see who they could get to cooperate with them. That's more of the, they said there was he had a man in black kind of come and visit him. It's probably in the other part of the letter, but he said that some guy came and visited him and told him to shut up about it afterwards. This is the 1999, I got to hurry up now, MUFON convention, where Bill gave this speech where he admitted that he had talked to people in the Air Force OSI and had cooperated with them and not really spread disinformation. He claims the only disinformation he ever spread was the Aquarius document, which we will get to. This is not the Aquarius document. This is something that's never been seen before because Bill found it in his files. This is something they gave him when they first met him. Richard Doty took him to meet this man later they referred to as the Falcon. He was a man in the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is kind of the military CIA. They gave him this and said, why don't you take a look at this? And it was about some project called Silver Sky from the 1960s. He went and checked some of these names out. These names, these places, and none of them matched up. So he came back and he said, what's going on? And Falcon and this guy Falcon and Richard Doty said, good, you passed the test. You actually went out and checked on it before going out and yelling to everybody that you had a document that had to do with some weird project called Silver Sky. It never existed. They just did this to see if they could trust him. Then about a year later, about a year later, they gave him this. He had seen this, Bill had seen this come in on a teletype machine in the Air Force OSI office. Actually, it was on a screen. And a few months later, they handed him this, and this document, and said, could you give this to Benowitz? What it was a description of Benowitz's pictures that they had taken from, that had disappeared from his house, he said. Pictures of the things he saw flying over the base. They also said that the intelligence channels, all dissemination of official intelligence channels are restricted, with restricted access to MJ-12. That was this was in 1981 or 82 when this document was given to Bill Moore. That was the first time anybody ever heard of something called MJ-12 at the bottom of this little document. But this was a fake document too. What he had seen, Bill said that some of these things were changed. There's things in here that there's no Bolton-Reinfeld method of, it's in here somewhere. Bolton-Reinfeld method determined that the objects were not, and it also said these things should go through through NASA, which is not. It was supposed to be the NSA. led by NSA, not NASA. But that was put in there just to screw around with him. He gave this to Benowitz and told him to take it with a grain of salt. And Benowitz never brought it out or said anything about it. But the effect was achieved. He knew somebody was interested in what he was doing. And that, I thought that was one of the pictures that was described, but they said that was a C-5A transport. That is not. That's a passenger plane. Something crashed on the Archuleta Mesa up near Dulce in 1988, or 85, I'm sorry. The Air Force had actually flown Benowitz up to the Archuleta Mesa and left stuff up there. Jeeps, old storage sheds, and flew him over an Air Force helicopter and said, "Look at that stuff, Paul. Why don't you take a look at that?" This was drawing his attention away from Kirtland because they didn't want him looking over here and listening to those signals and having anything to do with that. So they sent him, 300 miles away up to the upper northwest corner of the state. But so he decided that this was where he should concentrate his efforts. And he did. And they were very happy about this. The disinformation worked. But the thing was, in 1985, he was a pilot, remember? He was flying over the Mesa and he saw something crashed up there. And by the time he got up there with a camera, this was what was left, or what he said. I mean, this proves nothing to anybody except that maybe there's something burned there. The problem was that all of his pictures and things that he'd taken when there was something there disappeared somehow, was taken out of his house. This is what he said he saw crashed up on there, and he called it U.S. Black Delta ship. Drew pictures of it. All he had left were these pictures he'd drawn because his photographs were gone. I looked at these things, and this was in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. They were still working on the stealth. For some reason, he changed his mind about what it looked like. He said there were two things crashed there, and drew this, which pretty much looks like this is an old stealth fighter. This is one of the prototypes before they made the final one. But I think that what he saw up there was a crashed stealth fighter. So the NSA got involved. Some guy from the NSA started writing to him and started encouraging him more in this Dulce thing, but also trying to tell him what he saw crashed was a flying saucer and not a stealth fighter. He does talk about stealth in here. Remember what disinformation is. He says something interesting is going on in the Dulce area, no proof positive. This guy was posing as somebody that was trying to be kind of a confidant and an insider and trying to help Paul out, but what he was doing is basically telling him a line of crap. He also he started talking about this race of aliens that had been here for a long time. They were called the E-bands, which is weird because I think he means EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities, and Swedes, which he spells S-E-W-A-D-S. I think he means like Swedes, like the 1950s contactees. They saw people that looked, blonde hair, blue-eyed. They call them Swedes. Nordics, yes. He called them Sweds. Anyway.
That stuff engages the right brain. It engages the right brain.
Uh-huh.
That, and it gets you into a slightly hypnotic state because those words are so suggestive of several other things.
Right.
And that's why it works.
Uh-huh. He told him a story about how they'd been here for hundreds of years, and that there were two races, a good one and a bad one. They had noticed the atomic age had started and started trying to warn the humans about this. In a remote area near Roswell, two Swede aircraft crashed. This was not too many years after the Roswell incident by Bill Moore came out. The second one by Randall and Schmidt had not been out yet. One ship was totally destroyed, debris scattered over a large area. Here, one crewman named EDE, whatever that means. He's taken to Kirtland. Dr. Lang was called in to care for, but he was unable. Anyway, Project Signal was initiated to maintain contact. That was something that a lot of people in the late 80s said that was a project to communicate with aliens. But this is in a letter filled with a bunch of bullshit. So I don't know what to believe about that. Yeah, and then he reiterated that there was a Dulce base. And June 2nd, he is saying he was reinforcing Paul's ideas that the ships were shot down were alien ships or alien ships that were piloted by humans, when in fact it was probably a stealth aircraft. That's his picture. This is the Trestle. It's a molecular magnetic pulse testing facility in Kirtland. A lot of people thought that this was what the signals were coming from, but these are pulses. They don't have any information in them. They put aircraft out on here. I mean, a 747 would go from about to there. It's huge. It's the biggest wooden structure in the world. And they would pulse them with electromagnetic radiation to see if their electronics would get fried if a nuclear bomb had gone off, which creates a huge electromagnetic pulse. What's more important is this thing, the Starfire optical range. Now, it looks like an observatory, and they're looking at stars and planets and stuff, but they weren't. They were looking at satellites. Spy satellites fly over the base all the time. This was the late 80s. This guy, Robert Fugate, was in charge of the Starfire facility. He invented, and this was right in Benowitz's line of sight. He could see this thing if he had some binoculars. He could see the Starfire range, you know, just little bits of it, but it was there. Fugate invented a method for looking into space and seeing things even during the daytime without having the atmospheric disturbance. You know, you look at stars, they twinkle. That's because the atmosphere is like looking through, what, 20 feet of water or something like that. He invented a method whereby the mirror, you know, a refractive telescope has a mirror to gather light and amplify it. This mirror had plungers underneath it that would deform the mirror. So it would be a flat mirror, and it would be going like this the whole time. What it was doing was deforming the mirror in exactly the opposite way that the atmosphere was bending the light. So you'd get a clear picture of what was up there. They couldn't do this until the late 1970s. And then in about the late 90s, suddenly it was a big idea and a new thing. But it had been going on since the 70s, since the late 70s. The idea was proposed in the 50s, but they didn't have the technology to have, one, have a mirror, and two, to be able to control it. So it's like looking at a thing of water waving like this, but it's a mirror that's just deforming. And instead of, you know, it's like looking at reflection in the water and suddenly stopping the water so it's still, so you can see everything clearly. That's something imaged with the adaptive optics system. It's a satellite. You know, it's like what? Maybe 100, couple hundred miles away, about 20 or 30 feet across. That's without the adaptive optics. That's with it, and that's after they clean it up. So they could see what kind of satellites were coming over, what they were doing, possibly. They also communicated with lasers with these satellites, not radio waves. They found out by people stationed in Russia who were sending this information back, which is another layer of, we don't want him messing with any of this stuff. Because these people in Russia, if they'd found out that they were looking at these satellites, knew what they were, and also knew how to control them, actually, I was told. They could change the satellite's attitude and then come around the other end, and the Soviets were going, what happened? The satellite's completely out of whack. They'd change it to come back around this way to take pictures, and they'd turn it around again, and it would come back. And this was successful for many years, and the Soviets never found out. There is a part actually the adaptive optics uses a star or something to sight on, because you have to have something to tell you which way the atmosphere is going. But when you're following satellites, which are doing this, you can't use a star. There's no fixed area. It's going through a fixed field. So what they invented was a laser. They would shoot a laser up into the atmosphere and somehow look at the way the laser was being deformed by the atmosphere and have an artificial star to sight on. And this is a picture of one of those things in operation at, I think it's the Keck Observatory, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's a laser coming out that the adaptive optics is using to sight on. The reason I showed that and explained that is that Bill Moore took this picture in the mid-'80s. Paul Benowitz said, why don't you take a picture of the Manzano Mountains? Well, why? I get some weird pictures, just do it. So he took this picture and he got it back, and there's this light coming up, and then for some reason it suddenly stops here, and I don't know why. Anyway, what I think that is the adaptive optics laser following something across the sky, and he just happened to catch it when it was doing it. This is the way they could do it during the day too, which was when the satellites usually came over. I mean, it's lit by the sun. So I think actually that was, all the pictures Benowitz had of this thing, whatever this thing is flying, you couldn't see it unless you took a picture of it for some reason. But all the pictures that Benowitz had of this were gone. They were confiscated. He could never find them. Eventually, after getting all this disinformation pumped into him, Benowitz finally had a nervous breakdown. He said that he would go out in the desert at night in his car. He didn't know where he'd went. Bill Moore and Doty, who wouldn't tell me, said they saw injection marks up his arm, all these injection marks. They didn't know where those came from. They didn't know if he was doing it himself. Somebody else was doing it to him. Doty said he didn't know anything about it. I'm not so sure. Bill obviously didn't. The funny thing is I asked them separately. Bill said it was on his right arm, and I went to Doty. I said, did he have injection marks? Yes. Which arm? Right arm. You sure? Yeah. And I said, okay. I mean, it's a 50-50 chance, but But eventually, things got so bad that he had to be put in a mental institution and it was only for about 3 months, long enough, but some people said he was there for years. Anyway, I actually found this place. It's on Wyoming. It's right up the street from Thunder Scientific and the Kirtland Gate, which if you drive for 10 minutes is that way. He was there for 3 months. He came out, and when I was writing the book, he actually, when I was in Albuquerque, he had actually died 2 weeks before I got out there the first time. But they wouldn't have allowed me to talk to him. His family didn't want anything to do with it. I went to Thunder Scientific, and his son Brad told me, we don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm not going to help you. And I didn't really want to write the book at that point, but I just went ahead and did it, and I said, I'll send you a copy when it's done. Benowitz was not a crazy person, but he was made that way because he had this Achilles heel, this soft spot about UFOs, and he was so interested in what he thought he was going to find that he believed just about anything the Air Force told him. And the reason was because they had a lot of things going on the base they didn't want people to know about, and if they could cover it up under the subject of UFOs, that was fine with them. The main point of the book was just to be careful about who you believe, and be careful with the information you get, and evaluate it over many years. Otherwise, you're ready to just about believe anything. That's it.